the encounter, the sun was weak in the alien sky, sending pale light through the broken towers of an abandoned city. A lone human, Daniel, walked carefully through the ruins, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He had been stranded here for days, searching for anything to eat, anything to drink, anything to keep moving. The world was silent, almost too silent, as if even the wind was afraid to pass through these dead streets. Daniel carried only a small pack. Inside it was a single wrapper, and inside the wrapper was his last piece of chocolate. He had been saving it, hoping to eat it when things became truly desperate. And by now, things were exactly that. Still, he held on to it, as if that small piece of sweetness was more than food. It was hope. Hope that he was still human, still alive, still capable of remembering what Earth once tasted like. As he stepped into the shadow of a collapsed building, he heard it, a faint sound, like the whimper of a small animal, trembling and soft. Daniel froze, every muscle tight, his eyes scanning the darkness. He whispered under his breath, "Who's there?" though he did not expect an answer. From behind a pile of stone and broken glass, something moved. At first, Daniel thought it was a wounded creature, but then he saw her, a child, thin and shaking, with large dark eyes that seemed too big for her face. Her skin had a faint shimmer, almost like silver under the light, and her hair hung in tangled strands. She looked both alien and fragile, like a star that was fading. The girl pressed her back against the wall, afraid, her arms wrapped around herself. She stared at Daniel, as if she was unsure if he was real or just another shadow in this dead city. He raised his hand slowly, trying to show he was not a threat. "Easy," he said softly, his voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl did not answer, only stared, her lips dry, her body trembling. Daniel noticed the way she kept glancing at his pack, not with curiosity, but with hunger. It was the same hunger he had felt in himself for days, sharp and painful. His chest tightened. She was starving. He opened his pack and pulled out the small wrapper. For a moment, he hesitated, staring at the chocolate, his last piece, his last comfort. His stomach growled at the sight of it, reminding him how badly he needed it. But then he looked at her again, the hollow cheeks, the shaking arms, the silent plea in her eyes. Without another thought, he knelt down and held it out. The girl's eyes widened, glowing faintly in the dim light. She did not move at first, as if afraid it was a trick. Daniel pushed the chocolate closer, his hand steady. "It's for you," he said quietly. "Go on, take it, slowly, very slowly." She reached out with trembling fingers. When the chocolate touched her hand, she clutched it tightly, as if it was treasure. She looked at him once more, searching his face, then placed the chocolate against her lips. Her teeth sank into it, and instantly her eyes filled with wonder. The sweetness melted on her tongue. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. It was not a big smile, only small, fragile, but Daniel saw it. The way her shoulders loosened, the way her eyes softened. It was as if that tiny piece of chocolate carried not only taste, but life. She ate slowly, savoring every crumb, every hint of sugar, as if she feared it might vanish. Daniel sat down on the broken floor near her, leaning his back against a cracked wall. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by her soft chewing. He wanted to ask questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone in this dead city? But he held his tongue. Something about her told him that pushing too hard might break her completely. The girl glanced at him again, her lips sticky with chocolate, her expression softer now. She whispered something in a language he did not know, her voice delicate like falling glass. Daniel shook his head gently. "I don't understand," he said, "but you're safe with me." Even if he wasn't sure it was true, he wanted her to believe it. A cold wind swept through the ruins, carrying the distant echo of engines. Daniel frowned, listening. but the sound faded quickly, leaving only silence again. The girl seemed to hear it too. Her eyes darted to the sky, her body tightening with fear. Daniel noticed, his heart sinking. She's not just lost, he thought. She's hiding. She moved closer to him, not touching, but near enough that he could feel the heat of her fragile frame. He looked down at her, realizing he had made a choice. Without thinking, he had given her his last food, his last comfort, his last tie to home, and in doing so, he had bound himself to her fate. The ruins seemed darker now, as if shadows gathered around them. Somewhere in the distance, something moved. Not human, not friendly. Daniel tightened his grip on his pack, his jaw set. The girl with chocolate still on her lips stared up at him with trust shining in her alien eyes. He had no idea who she truly was, or what dangers would come. All he knew was that he had given away his last piece of chocolate, and in that moment, without knowing it, he had changed the future of two worlds. The stranger's secret. The night came quickly on the ruined world, shadows stretching long across the broken streets. Daniel and the alien girl moved carefully, her small feet almost silent against the cracked stone. She followed him without a word, her eyes darting at every noise, every flicker of movement. It was clear she was used to hiding, used to running, used to fear. Daniel wanted to ask her many questions, but he held back. The way she hugged herself told him that trust did not come easily. So he walked slowly, letting her decide if she wished to stay close. And yet, every time he looked back, she was right there behind him, never more than a few steps away. They found a shelter inside the remains of what looked like an old market hall. Broken stalls lay scattered, shelves turned to dust, and strange alien signs hung crooked on the walls. Daniel cleared a small corner and dropped his pack. Gesturing for her to sit, she hesitated, then lowered herself carefully, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tight around them. For a while, there was only silence, broken by the faint hum of wind, moving through cracks in the walls. Daniel leaned back, his body aching from days of travel, but his eyes remained on her. Finally he spoke, his voice calm. "What's your name?" The girl looked up, her lips parting, and whispered a sound, soft, fragile, almost like music. "Lyra," she said, and then she looked down again, as if afraid she had given away too much. Daniel repeated it quietly. "Lyra," tasting the sound of it. She glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then quickly turned away. It was the first real piece of herself she had shared, and he understood its weight. Names mattered, especially when everything else had been taken away. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, she shifted, pulling something from beneath her torn sleeve. A thin bracelet, metallic and dark, almost blending into her skin. It looked broken, half of its surface cracked, faint lines of light pulsing through it. She held it close to her chest, as if guarding it, her eyes narrowing when she saw his gaze. Daniel raised his hands quickly. "I won't take it," he said softly. "It's yours." Her shoulders eased slightly, but she still clutched the bracelet as if her life depended on it. For a moment, Daniel wondered what it was. Technology, maybe, or a piece of something more valuable than gold. The way she protected it told him it was important, maybe even sacred. The girl finally spoke again, her voice trembling but clearer now. She pointed at the bracelet, then at her chest, whispering a word Daniel did not know. Her tone carried meaning though, and he understood. This was hers, her secret, her identity. But why was it cracked? Why was she hiding it? Why was she hiding it all? Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Are you running from someone?" Her body stiffened at once, her breath catching, her eyes filling with fear. She did not answer, but she did not need to. The truth was already written in her trembling hands. Whoever she was, whatever she carried, someone wanted her silenced. The wind outside shifted, carrying a low hum. Daniel froze, listening, his instincts screaming. The girl's head snapped toward the doorway, her body curling tighter. It was not just the wind. There were engines, distant, but moving. Daniel stood quickly, stepping to the broken wall and peering out into the darkness. Far above, faint lights crossed the sky, slow and deliberate, not stars, not meteors, ships, and not human ships either. He turned back, his stomach sinking, and saw the terror in Lyra's eyes. She pressed against the wall, whispering rapidly in her own tongue. Her voice cracked with desperation, and though he could not understand her words, the meaning was clear. She feared them. Whoever flew those ships, they were hunting, and they were hunting her. Daniel's mind raced. The image of her clutching the bracelet burned into him. It was not just a trinket. It was a marker, a key, maybe even a crown in disguise. He remembered the shimmer of her skin, the strange glow of her eyes, the way she carried herself despite her weakness. She was no ordinary refugee. She was something more, something hidden. The ships faded into the distance, their hum dissolving into silence again. Daniel let out a slow breath, but the girl did not relax. Her hands tightened around the bracelet. Her body still curled like a trapped bird. And then, she looked at him, really looked, her eyes glistening with unspoken words. Daniel crouched in front of her, his tone steady. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but you don't have to be afraid of me." She blinked, her lips parting, and for the first time, she reached out, not to take, not to defend, but to touch. Her fingers brushed his hand, light as air, and then pulled back quickly. It was small, but it was trust. Daniel knew then, whatever danger she carried, whatever secret she held, he was already part of it. He had given her his last food, his last comfort, and now she had given him her name, her secret, and her fear. The ruins around them seemed smaller, the night darker, and the world more dangerous. But the bond between them was no longer weak. It was forming, fragile, but real. He sat down again, leaning back, keeping one hand near the broken entrance. Lyra curled into the corner, her eyes heavy, but still watching him. As sleep slowly pulled at them both, Daniel realized something that sent a chill through him. He had thought she was just a lost girl, but now he knew. She was running from power, and power was coming for them. The hunt begins. The morning came grey and heavy, clouds hanging low like chains across the alien sky. Daniel woke first, his body stiff from sleeping on stone, his eyes scanning the ruined market for danger. Beside him, Lyra slept curled in a corner, her small frame shivering even under the weak light. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to hope that maybe the night had passed quietly, that maybe the strange ships had gone. But hope was fragile here, and it broke quickly. The silence was shattered by a distant roar. Not thunder, not storm, but engines, heavy and sharp. Daniel stood fast, his heart hammering, and shook Lyra gently awake. Her eyes opened wide, and at once she understood. Her small hands clutching the broken bracelet tight against her chest. Together they moved out of the broken hall. Stepping into the cold air, Daniel raised his eyes to the sky, and there they were, dark shapes cutting across the clouds. Not one, not two, but a formation, scanning beams trailing from their bellies, sweeping the ruins like searching fingers. Lyra froze, her breath quick and sharp, her eyes fixed on those beams, as if they carried death itself. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her behind the half-fallen wall of stone. The air vibrated with the low hum of the engines, and every instinct in Daniel's body screamed to stay hidden. The beams passed over broken towers, lighting them in pale glow, then shifted closer. He could feel the hairs on his neck rising, as if those beams were already touching him. Lyra pressed against the stone, her whole body trembling. She whispered a word again and again, the same word, her voice broken with fear. Daniel could not understand the language, but he knew the meaning well. It was prayer, It was desperation. It was survival. He tightened his grip on her hand, whispering, "Quiet, stay with me," though his own voice trembled too. The ships drifted lower, scanning, searching, patient like predators. Daniel knew they were not here for him. They were here for her, and that made his stomach twist. Why was this child so important, so hunted? What secret did she carry that could send warships to scour a dead world? He did not know the answer, but he knew one thing clearly. If they found her, it would be the end. The beams drew nearer, painting the ground in shifting circles of light. Daniel pulled Lyra back, deeper into the ruins, weaving between collapsed walls and broken stone. Every sound mattered now. The crunch of his boots, the small gasp of her breath, even the rattling of loose debris. The hunters above were listening, searching, waiting for a mistake. They reached the skeleton of a tall building, its roof gone, its walls cracked, but still standing like broken teeth. Daniel guided her inside, moving carefully, every step chosen with care. The hum of the ships grew louder, closer, until it felt like the sky itself was shaking. Dust rained down from the walls, small stones rolling across the floor. Lyra's hand tightened suddenly, pulling him to a stop. Daniel turned, and in her wide eyes, he saw it. She had heard something he had not. From the shadows of the ruined hall came a different sound. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, armored. Daniel's chest went cold. It was not just ships above. There were boots on the ground, soldiers, hunters, trackers. The girl's eyes filled with fear as figures emerged from the smoke. Tall beings in dark armor, their helmets glowing faint red. They moved in silence, weapons raised, scanning the ruins, moving like wolves that had already caught the scent. Daniel pulled Lyra behind a broken pillar, his heart racing, his breath short. The soldiers were close, too close, their voices low and mechanical as they communicated. He could not understand their language, but the tone was enough. They were certain she was near. One soldier lifted a small device, and the air filled with sharp pulses, like radar beats echoing through bone. Lyra gasped, clutching her bracelet tighter, the glow pulsing faster, as if answering the signal. Daniel's eyes widened. Whatever that bracelet was, it was calling them. He grabbed her wrist, whispering urgently, "Turn it off, hide it, anything," but she shook her head, tears streaming, whispering back in her strange tongue, "Cannot, cannot." The soldiers turned at once, their heads snapping toward the sound. Daniel knew they had only seconds. He pulled Lyra into the stairwell of the ruined hall, stumbling down crumbling steps. The ground shook as boots followed, the hunters closing in. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding, every breath like swallowing stone. Daniel led her through the lower halls, twisting through collapsed corridors. The sound of armored pursuit thundered behind them, closer with every step. He could hear the static hum of weapons charging, smell the heat of machines in the air. At last, they burst into open space, a courtyard filled with rubble and broken statues. The soldiers poured in after them, forming a half circle, their red visors glowing through the dust. Daniel placed himself in front of Lyra, his arms spread, though he had no weapon but stone, no shield but his body. His voice came out raw, defiant. "You want her, you'll go through me." The soldiers paused, their leader stepping forward, a tall figure, his armor darker than the rest, his helmet marked with a crest of sharp lines. The leader raised his weapon slowly, pointing it at Daniel. But before he could fire, Lyra cried out, her voice breaking into a scream that shook the air. The broken bracelet blazed with sudden light. Raw and untamed, energy burst outward, slamming into the soldiers, hurling them back like ragdolls. The courtyard exploded with light and sound, stone shattering, dust rising in a storm. Daniel fell to his knees, shielding his eyes, his ears ringing from the blast. When the dust settled, the soldiers lay scattered, their armor cracked, their weapons dead. Lyra stood trembling, the glow of the bracelet fading back to faint cracks. Her eyes filled with fear, not at the soldiers, but at herself. Daniel stared at her, breathless, stunned. She was not only hunted, not only important, she was powerful, and her secret was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Clues of royalty. The ruins were quiet again, but the silence felt heavy, not peaceful. Dust still floated in the air, broken statues lay scattered, and the smell of burned metal lingered. Daniel stood slowly, his hands shaking, his chest tight from the blast he had just witnessed. Lyra stood in the middle of the courtyard, her small frame trembling, the broken bracelet faintly glowing on her wrist. For a moment, Daniel could only stare at her. She looked fragile, frightened, but there was something else now, something he could not ignore. Power, raw and dangerous, had just burst out of her like lightning, and even though she seemed scared of it herself, Daniel could not shake the thought she was not ordinary. He walked toward her carefully, his voice low. "Lyra," he said. "What was that?" The girl hugged her arm close to her chest, shaking her head, her lips pressed tight. She did not want to answer, or maybe she could not explain. Her eyes darted to the fallen soldiers, then back to Daniel, searching his face for judgment, for fear. But Daniel did not step back. Instead, he crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "It saved us," he said. "You saved us." Her shoulders shook, and she whispered something in her language, her voice cracking with guilt. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood her expression. She was afraid of herself. He wanted to comfort her, but before he could, his eyes caught the bracelet more clearly. The cracks across its surface pulsed faintly, lines of light running through it like veins of fire. On one side, hidden beneath the dirt, a crest shone, carved into the metal. It was a symbol, an arc of stars above a crown, sharp and elegant. Daniel froze, staring, his mind racing. He had seen that mark before, not here, not on Earth, but in old records stored in human outposts, reports of alien dynasties, powerful houses, rulers of distant systems. The crest was royal, ancient, and it belonged to one of the most feared families in the sector. He looked at Lyra again, and suddenly the pieces began to fit. Her shimmering skin, her unusual eyes, the soldiers hunting her with such determination, and now the crest, proof that she was not just some lost child, not just a refugee, she was royalty. Daniel's chest tightened as the truth pressed on him. The chocolate he had given her, the small act of kindness, had not been to any child. It had been to someone with bloodlines that could start wars, end dynasties, change the fate of worlds. And he had no idea what kind of storm he had just stepped into. Lyra noticed his stare and quickly covered the bracelet with her hand. Her eyes widened with fear, as if she thought he would leave her now, or worse, betray her. Daniel shook his head slowly, raising his hands. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to tell anyone." His voice was steady, but inside he was shaken. He remembered stories whispered among soldiers, about alien courts full of betrayal, about crowns bought with blood. If she was truly a princess, then why was she here? Starving, hunted, abandoned. It made no sense, unless the danger was not from enemies outside her world, but from those closest to her. Assassins, betrayal, the fall of a royal line. She was the last piece left alive. Daniel's thoughts raced, but the girl moved closer, pulling at his sleeve. Her eyes begged him not to leave, not to see her as a burden, and Daniel, though terrified of what he had just learned, could not look away from her desperate trust. He sighed, nodding once, whispering, "You're safe with me, no matter who you are." The words felt heavy, like a promise that might break his life in half. But when she leaned against him, her body trembling less now, He knew he meant it. She had lost everything, but she had chosen to believe in him. A stranger, a human far from home. And that trust mattered more to him than the danger pressing from every direction. Above them, the sky rumbled. More ships passing far overhead. The hunt had not ended. It had only paused. Daniel tightened his jaw, his mind sharpening. If she was royalty, then these hunters were not just soldiers. They were executioners, sent to erase her name from history. He stood, helping her to her feet. "We can't stay here," he said firmly. "They'll be back stronger, and we have to be gone before they return." She nodded slowly, still clutching the bracelet, the glow hidden under her sleeve, but in her eyes, Daniel saw something new, courage, faint but rising, like a flame struggling in the dark. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Daniel could not shake the thought. He had given away his last piece of chocolate to a starving girl, and in return, he had found himself carrying the weight of a crown. She was not just Lyra, not just a child. She was a royal heir, lost and hunted, and her survival might decide the fate of a galaxy. And Daniel, without plan or choice, had become her guardian, not because of duty, not because of honor, but because when she had nothing left, he had given her kindness, and that kindness had tied him to her destiny, whether he wanted it or not. The first battle, the ruins did not rest, not for long. Daniel and Lyra had been moving for hours, slipping through alleys, crawling under collapsed bridges, hiding in shadows whenever the hum of engines passed above. Every step was heavy, every breath felt borrowed, and yet they pressed on. Daniel kept his eyes sharp, his body ready, but deep inside he knew running would not last forever. The hunters would come again, and when they did, hiding would not be enough. Lyra stayed close, her small hand gripping his sleeve, her eyes scanning every corner. Her silence was no longer just fear. It was understanding. She knew, just as he did, that the moment of confrontation was drawing near. They found shelter in the remains of a broken tower. Its walls leaned dangerously, its top long since collapsed, but it gave them cover. Inside, Daniel searched the rubble for anything that could be used. A length of pipe, a shard of metal, even stones, small weapons for a hopeless fight. He turned to Lyra, who sat near the wall. Clutching her cracked bracelet, she looked at him, her eyes tired, but her voice steady. "They come," she whispered. Daniel frowned, listening, and then he heard it too, the ground vibrating, the faint metallic march of armored boots. Closer, heavier, unstoppable. He gritted his teeth, gripping the pipe tightly. It was laughable. A human with scrap metal standing against soldiers in armor. But the thought of handing her over never crossed his mind. Not after what she had trusted him with. Not after what he had seen in her eyes. The first shadow appeared through the cracks of the wall, tall, armored, visor glowing red, weapon raised. Scanning the ruins with mechanical patience, Daniel pressed against the broken stone, his muscles tense. Waiting, Lyra's breath quickened, her fingers digging into the dirt, the glow of her bracelet pulsing faintly again. Then came the sound. 3 pulses, sharp and cold. A signal. And suddenly the silence shattered as the hunters stormed in. Daniel moved fast, swinging the pipe with all his strength, striking the first soldier across the helmet. The impact echoed. The soldier staggered, but did not fall. A second raised his weapon, light charging at its tip. Daniel grabbed a chunk of stone and hurled it, striking the weapon and throwing the aim off. The blast hit the wall, exploding in a spray of sparks. Dust filled the air, blinding, choking. But Daniel pushed forward, his heart pounding. The courtyard outside, lit with red beams, as more soldiers advanced. There were too many, far too many, but Daniel refused to retreat, his voice raw as he shouted, "Run, Lyra!" She shook her head, tears streaming. "No, with you," she whispered. The soldiers closed in, circling them like wolves. One lunged forward, striking Daniel across the chest, the blow throwing him against the wall. Pain burned through his ribs. His vision swam, but he forced himself to rise again. He could not fall, not yet, Lyra cried out, her small body trembling, the bracelet blazing brighter. The soldiers turned their visors toward her, and Daniel saw it, the hunger in their movements, the certainty that she was the target. He stepped in front of her, arms wide. Though his strength was failing, "Stay back," he growled, his voice filled with a defiance even he did not understand. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his armor heavier, his weapon longer. He spoke in his alien tongue, his words sharp, final, commanding. And though Daniel could not understand, he knew the meaning. It was surrender or death. He spat blood to the side and tightened his grip on the pipe, choosing neither. Then, Lyra screamed, louder than before. The bracelet split with light, a surge of raw energy bursting from her tiny frame. The ground shook, stone cracked. Air rippled with heat. The soldiers staggered, their weapons sparking, their armor screaming under the force. Daniel shielded his eyes, the blast roaring through the ruins. When it faded, the courtyard was broken. The hunters scattered, some unmoving, others crawling. Their weapons dead, Lyra fell to her knees, her body weak, her breath shallow. The bracelet dimmed again, cracks spreading further, as if each use was tearing it apart. Daniel rushed to her side, lifting her gently. Her skin was cold, her eyes heavy, but she whispered softly. "Sorry." He shook his head firmly. "Don't be," he said, his voice low, steady. "You saved us again." But inside, his fear grew. This power was saving her now, but it was killing her too. He looked at the broken soldiers, at the ruins around them, at the glow of the sky, where more ships might already be watching. This was no victory. This was survival bought at a terrible price. And he knew, with every step forward, the battles would only grow worse. But he also knew he would not abandon her. Not now, not ever. As the dust settled, Daniel tightened his arms around Lyra. The first battle had been fought, and somehow they had survived. But survival was only the beginning. The hunters would return, stronger, angrier, and next time, the fight might decide more than just their lives. Truth revealed. Night fell heavy over the ruins, darker than before. Daniel carried Lyra into a quiet cave, hidden beneath broken cliffs. Far from the open streets, the cave smelled of stone and damp earth. But it was safe, at least for now. He set her down gently on a flat rock, her body trembling with weakness. The glow of her cracked bracelet, fading almost to nothing. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing the dust from her hair. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes fluttered open, shimmering faintly in the dim light. She looked at him with guilt, fear, and something else, an urgency, as if she could no longer keep her secret hidden. Daniel leaned close, his voice soft but steady. "You saved me again, Lyra, but you're hurting yourself. What is happening to you?" For a long moment, she said nothing, her lips pressed tight, her hands gripping the broken bracelet. Then she whispered, her words halting but clear enough to understand. "Not safe. Not refugee," she said, her voice shaking. "I am lost." Daniel frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Last? Last of what?" Her eyes glistened as she forced the words out. "Last, royal blood," she whispered, each word heavy like stone. Daniel felt his chest tighten, his breath catching in his throat. He had suspected, but hearing it from her own lips was different. Final, undeniable. She pulled the bracelet forward, showing him the crest, etched into its side, the faint arc of stars above the crown, glowing weakly in the cracks. Her voice trembled as she explained. "Family, betrayed, palace burned, soldiers, came. I run, only me left." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she spoke, her small body shaking as if the memory itself was pain. Daniel's heart sank as the truth unfolded before him. This was no simple hunt. No random soldiers chasing a lost child. This was a purge, an attempt to erase her bloodline, her family, her very name from existence. And she had been left to starve, to die alone in the ruins, until he had stumbled across her. He sat in silence, his hands curling into fists, anger rising in his chest. How could anyone do this, even to a child, to betray their own princess, their own future? And yet looking at her, Daniel saw not weakness, but strength. She had survived hunger, fear, betrayal, and now she carried the weight of her world on her shoulders. Lyra reached for his hand, her touch faint but warm. Her eyes met his, pleading, fragile but steady. "You gave me food," she whispered, her voice cracking. "No one else. No kindness, only death, but you. Gave hope." Her words struck him deeper than any weapon could. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his voice rough. "I didn't know who you were," he admitted. "I only saw someone who needed help." She smiled weakly, her lips trembling. "That is why I trust you." The cave grew quiet again, only the sound of the wind outside echoing through the cracks. But between them, something had changed, something unspoken, but undeniable. Daniel now knew the truth. She was not just Lyra, not just a girl he had saved. She was the last heir of a royal line, a living target carrying the weight of a crown. Her survival meant more than either of them could measure, and by helping her, he had already chosen sides. The silence broke with a distant rumble. Faint but rising, Daniel stiffened. Listening closely, the hunters had not given up, and the night would not protect them for long. But as he looked back at Lyra, her tired eyes shining with fragile courage, he made a silent vow. No matter what came, no matter how strong the enemy, he would not abandon her. He had stumbled into her fight by chance, but now it was his fight too. Not because of her crown, not because of her title, but because when she had nothing left, she had trusted him. Daniel stood, gripping a jagged piece of metal from the ground. The cave walls trembled slightly with the approach of engines, faint light flickering at the far cracks. He turned back to her one last time, his voice calm, steady, full of promise. "They want to erase you, Lyra, but they'll have to go through me first." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time not only of fear. For the first time, there was hope, small and fragile but real. She nodded once, clutching her bracelet tightly, and together, in the silence before the storm, they waited for the next battle to begin. Humanity's choice. The night sky was no longer quiet. Engines roared above the ruins, dark shapes cutting through the clouds, their lights burning like fire. Dozens of ships, more than before, spreading across the broken city like a net. This was no patrol, no small squad. This was an army, sent to finish what the hunters had failed to do. Daniel stood at the cave mouth, his eyes fixed on the sky. Lyra sat behind him, clutching her broken bracelet, her face pale but her eyes steady. The air vibrated with the sound of descending war machines, and the ground shook as dropships landed in the distance. Daniel tightened his grip on the jagged weapon in his hand, knowing it was useless, but holding it anyway. The sound of boots echoed soon after. Countless, marching, closing in. He glanced at Lyra, her small frame trembling, but her chin lifted. For the first time, she did not look like a scared child. She looked like someone facing her fate. Her voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "They will not stop. They want me gone. Forever." Daniel turned to her, his jaw tight. "Then they'll have to fight for it," he said, his voice sharp. She shook her head, tears welling. "You cannot fight them all, Daniel. You will die." He crouched in front of her, his hands firm on her shoulders, his eyes locked on hers. "Listen to me," he said, steady and fierce. "They may have ships, weapons, armies, but they don't have what I have." She blinked, confused. "What?" He gave a small defiant smile. I have humanity. The word hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. He stood again, stepping toward the cave entrance. As the first beams of light cut across the ground, the soldiers appeared soon after. Armored figures glowing red in the night. Their leader stepped forward, his armor blacker than the rest, his crest sharp and cruel. He raised a voice that echoed through the ruins. Words in a tongue Daniel did not know, but the meaning was clear. Surrender the girl, or be destroyed. Daniel stepped out, placing himself between the cave and the army, his arms wide. She is under my protection, he shouted, his voice raw. If you want her, you'll have to come through me. The soldiers paused, as if surprised at the defiance of one unarmed human. The leader tilted his head, as though amused, then raised his weapon slowly. Behind him, the ships hummed louder, beams of light crossing the ruins. Preparing to fire, Daniel's chest tightened, but he stood firm, his voice rising again. You think she is alone, but she is not, he called. She has me, she has humanity, and we never bow. The words carried across the ruins, echoing into the night. For a moment, there was silence, a tension so sharp it could cut stone. Then the leader gave the order, weapons charging, beams glowing red. But before the first shot could fall, Lyra stepped forward. She moved past Daniel, her small figure framed by the glow of the ships. Her bracelet, cracked and broken, blazed one last time, light spilling through the darkness. Her voice, though weak, rang clear. I am Lyra of the royal blood, last of the crown. You will not erase me. The soldiers shifted, some stepping back, as if the weight of her words pressed against their armor. Daniel turned, his eyes wide, but she gave him a small, tired smile. You gave me hope. Now I give you truth, she whispered. Then the light burst outward, brighter than before, shaking the ground, blinding the sky. The ships above shuddered, their beams scattering, their engines failing. Soldiers fell to their knees as energy pulsed through their armor. Weapons exploded in their hands, lights shattering like glass. The leader stumbled back, raising his arm as if to shield himself. But even he could not resist. The power spread wide, crashing against stone, ripping through the ruins. Daniel shielded his face, his heart hammering. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The ships above were broken, drifting, their engines dead. The soldiers lay scattered, their weapons useless, their armor cracked. Lyra collapsed to the ground, her bracelet shattering at last. Daniel rushed to her side, lifting her gently, his heart racing. Her eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. You see, she whispered, her voice faint. They cannot take everything. Not while hope still lives. Daniel held her close, his throat tight. She had revealed herself, had chosen not to hide, had stood as royalty even in weakness, and in doing so, she had done more than survive. She had declared that her line would not end. The galaxy would know she still lived, and that a human had stood with her. As dawn broke, pale light spilling over the ruins, Daniel looked at the horizon. He knew this was only the beginning. More enemies would come, more battles would be fought. But he also knew something stronger than fear. Humanity had made a choice, and so had he. He had given away his last piece of chocolate to a starving alien girl, not knowing she was royalty, and that single act of kindness had grown into defiance, into survival, into hope. The universe would remember that humans did not bow. And Daniel, standing with Lyra in the broken dawn, knew this was only the start of their story.